Have come our way. Let's open our Bibles and read from 3 John, the first 8 verses. It begins, "The elder to the beloved Gaius, whom I love in truth. Beloved, I pray that you may prosper in all things and be in health, just as your soul prospers. For I rejoiced greatly when brethren came and testified of the truth that is in you, just as you walk in the truth. I have no greater joy than to hear that my children walk in truth. Beloved, you do faithfully whatever you do for the brethren and for strangers who have borne witness of your love before the church. If you send them forward on their journey in a manner worthy of God, you will do well, because they went forth for His name's sake, taking nothing from the Gentiles. We therefore ought to receive such, that we may become fellow workers for the truth."
Sometimes my eyes are filled with teardrops. My sorrows here are hard to bear. But in God's word I read the promise. There'll be no tears, no tears up there. No more tears in that bright city. No more tears in heaven fair. There'll be no reason there for crying. There'll be no tears, no tears up there. There'll be no days of grief or sighing. No weary nights of anxious prayer. For in that land there'll be no dying. There'll be no tears up there. No more tears in that bright city. No more tears in heaven fair. There'll be no reason there for crying. There'll be no tears up there.
We are back for the study portion of our devotional time. We're looking at 3 John, the first 8 verses. And this short one-chapter epistle is a great treatise on the importance of hospitality. You know, our world would be a better place if more people extended true hospitality. Well, here John is writing to an individual, a brother in Christ, Gaius, and commending him for his hospitality, for his efforts to see that the gospel is put forward by helping those who are missionaries, in effect, those who come to the church there, who come to his home there, those he has helped in various ways, as he has welcomed them into his home, as he has done all that he could to help them on their way, to bid them Godspeed, in other words, in their work of preaching and teaching the gospel. And it's a great example for us. He begins, John does, by referring to himself in this epistle as the elder, which in this context indicates the older brother. Not that John was an elder specifically in the Lord's church, as was Peter, for example, but simply the word here indicates he was older. And so he's writing here, he says, the older, writing to the beloved Gaius. That word beloved, incidentally, which is a term of tender affection for this brother in Christ, is used 4 different times in this short epistle, as John refers to Gaius as one who is beloved. Now notice he says, to the beloved Gaius, whom I love in truth. And the idea there is whom I truly, sincerely love. And here's a great wish for him in verse 2 from John. Beloved, I pray that you may prosper in all things and be in health just as your soul prospers. Well, that really provides for us a barometer, does it not, as to how much we can prosper materially. In other words, we need to keep everything in balance. John writes, I pray that you may prosper in all things and be in health, but in balance with the prosperity of your soul. That reminds us that we need to keep our priorities in order. We need to make sure that our first priority is that it is well with our soul, as that beautiful hymn, It Is Well With My Soul, suggests. And then make sure that everything else is in its proper balance. And so that's a worthy wish for all from this inspired writer, John. And then he goes on in verse 3, for I rejoiced greatly when brethren came and testified of the truth that is in you, just as you walk in the truth. Here is an emphasis on truth, something that John emphasized frequently in his writings and expressed his gratitude for in terms of those who were walking in truth. And walking in truth indicates that truth is something in which we must continue to walk. In other words, we must abide in the truth. He emphasizes this point further in the next verse, verse 4. I have no greater joy than to hear that my children walk in truth. Those whom John had had the privilege of teaching and influencing through his writings and so forth, he rejoices that they continue to abide or to walk in truth. Then he gets to the matter of the hospitality that Gaius was so famous for, if you will. Beloved, he writes in verse 5, and there's that word beloved again. Beloved, you do faithfully whatever you do for the brethren and for strangers, that is, those whom he'd never met. But he says, who have borne witness, verse 6, of your love before the church. If you send them forward on their journey in a manner worthy of God, you will do well. In other words, Gaius was known for helping, as we mentioned earlier, those who were teachers and preachers of the gospel. He bid them Godspeed by helping them in any way he could, by extending his warm hospitality. And those whom he helped were identified further in verse 7, because they went forth for his name's sake. In other words, these people whom you have helped have been those who've been preaching and teaching the gospel. They have gone forth in the name, that is, by the authority of Christ and God, taking nothing from the Gentiles. In other words, they were not dependent upon those out in the world, those to whom they were preaching. They weren't dependent upon them for their support. It's the church and men like Gaius who were responsible for helping them so that they could preach the gospel to them. You know, that reminds me of something we've said here on the Good News Today program many times now, and that is that you, as a viewer, as a listener to Good News Today, you will never be asked for money from this program, because the churches of Christ, individual members of the churches of Christ, congregations, make this work and many other good works possible. And so we never solicit funds from our viewing and listening audience. Never will, never have, never will. because we don't charge for the gospel of Christ. The gospel, the church is the pillar and ground of the truth and charged with the responsibility for preaching the gospel. And that's what John is saying to Gaius. You are one who helps your brothers in Christ as members of the Church of Christ. And so he says, we therefore, then verse 8, we therefore ought to receive such that we may become fellow workers for the truth. And so supporting faithful preachers makes one a fellow worker with those preachers. Not everyone can go into foreign mission fields, for example, and preach the gospel, but the church is charged with the responsibility for seeing that others can. And that's what Gaius was doing as a member of the New Testament church, the church we read about in the New Testament. And he became a fellow worker with those who were preaching and teaching the gospel. So this is a great treatise, as we said, on hospitality and walking in truth. Well, speaking of walking,